Back channels can be important because they give you a perspective that you don't get through the normal diplomatic means of where a particular party is coming out.
In order to break through like Carter did in Camp David, you have to be courageous enough to allow another channel to operate.
My old friend, good friend Leon Charney was a back channel in trying to convey information between the Israelis and the U.S. Leon's an American, but he's very close to a lot of Israelis, and he was extremely close to Ezer Weitzman, who was then the defense minister of Israel.
Matthew, thanks for being with us.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Matt, your movie, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, is about the 1979 Camp David Peace Accords and the back channels that were necessary to bring it to fruition. What are back channels, and why is it relevant to make a movie about them?
Yeah, so my partner and I, we started researching Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace circa around 2007. And we came across this little book called Spy for Peace. I mean, we did a lot of research. We wanted to do something on the Middle East. We thought the Middle East right now was currently, this was during the middle of the Iraqi war, and we were in Afghanistan, and we felt like things just weren't being handled right by the last administration. So we thought it would be helpful to tell a story about the Middle East, and you had a few filmmakers that were doing things about Iraq in particular, or Afghanistan in particular, and what was going on that was wrong there. We instead, we wanted to show something that was done right, and we felt if you could show something that was done right in history, that's been proven by history, it's been done right, everybody on all sides agrees, that would make a big statement today. We found this one little book called Spy for Peace, written by Leon Charney, and we thought that was a fascinating angle. Back channels are these secret negotiators. They're generally business people, and they're generally doing it full time. They're doing it year round, but because of the wealth of relationships that they have, they become very key players in diplomatic negotiations, particularly private diplomatic negotiations that you don't want the public spotlight on.
As the film shows, non-government officials like Leon Charney, who advised the late Israeli Defense Minister Ezer Weitzman, and Karl Kahin, the Austrian Jewish businessman, were particularly important in making the peace treaty happen. When did their importance start becoming publicly known, and in general, how do private citizens get involved in these backdoor channels?
Yeah, that's interesting. To a certain extent, of some of the back channels that we go into in the film, their involvement isn't known even to today. And that's why the film has been getting such a positive response, because it's such a fascinating story for various reasons. Most back channels want to stay private. It could affect their next negotiation. It could affect several business deals that they have going on at the same time. So they don't necessarily want the spotlight, and the spotlight doesn't help their negotiations. I think Leon's involvement was known pretty early because he was very close, not only with Ezer Weitzman, but he was close with Bob Lipschitz, who was Jimmy Carter's general counsel, and he had a direct connection right to the president. And so that, he was known in a lot of New York circles as a very prominent business person. Karl Kahin is someone who's, goes back generations. The Kahin family in Austria have been, industrialists in Austria, one of the wealthiest families in Austria for generations now. They're known. A lot of the stuff he was doing behind the scenes wasn't known until he got a lot more passionate about it later in life, and he really wanted to see a comprehensive peace treaty in the Middle East, and so he became a lot more vocal and outspoken. And because of that, he would have death threats against him from all sides of the equations that came out in an interview that we did with his daughter. For various reasons, some of these guys stay very, very quiet, and you don't know about it. But that, it's fascinating to get people to open up on camera about these things.
Who, if any, do you think are the Karl Kahins of today?
Yeah, that's a good question too. It's interesting. When we started this film, my partner and I, we did two things. One thing was starting Channel Productions. The other thing was starting the Solarium Group. The Solarium Group actually engages in backdoor channel negotiations of sorts on a business level. Although we have been involved in some more political things. Someone like Leon, he's still around. He's in his 70s, and I think more and more, all of the great things he did behind the scenes will come out, because again, they were kept private for a long time. But he's certainly still around and still very active. My partner in the Solarium Group, Eric Weirson, he's an extremely active player between Central Africa, South Africa, and Brazil, and he shuttles back and forth between all of them. And it's generally business deals. It can be anything from commodities to some other things. I've got another close colleague, and I'm only mentioning close colleagues because the other guys that we deal with in this space probably don't want to be known. But Sergio Fernandez de Cordova, he's a name here in the city. He's done a lot of back channeling between South America, the U.S., and East Europe on some really interesting things, and some really great good has come from that too.
While Menachem Begin and Jimmy Carter were crucial to the peace treaty's success, while watching the film, I couldn't help but feel that the key was Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat. How was he different from his Arab peers then, and what separates him from the Arab leaders of today?
Yeah, so different. And I'll tell a little anecdote that captures it. So when we premiered at Abu Dhabi, I was in the front of the auditorium with my director, and we're getting asked questions by the various members in the audience. And one question we got was from a Palestinian woman, and she got up and she's very emotional right off the bat, and she said, "This doesn't address the problem properly. It doesn't address the Palestinian problem properly." And there was, a lot of anger. She was very, very upset. She started crying. And this is an anger, and this is something that we understand on both sides. Having done this, A, having done a lot of business in the area, B, having done this film, and we interview people on both sides. There's a lot of anger and a lot of hatred on both sides that's come up. And then someone in the audience yelled, and they said, "Yeah, Anwar Sadat was a puppet for the West." And so my director got a little bit upset at this moment. He goes, "You know what? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard." He goes, "If there was one leader in the Arab world like Anwar Sadat today," he said, "you wouldn't have half the problems that he did." And he's saying this in the Emirates, in Abu Dhabi, in front of a mostly Arab audience. We got so many handshakes afterwards for that, because there's always this silent majority that usually generally agrees with these things, but they keep quiet because there's a really vociferous minority that generally runs the day. We have great quotes in our film from Beatrice Ghali. We were lucky to interview him. He's someone who's obviously been prominent in Egyptian politics, and he's been prominent in the Arab Spring, and he was very prominent in the UN. He said the moderate voice has always been the majority voice in the Middle East. It's only since late 70s, mid 80s that you've really seen a re-entrenchment, and I don't think it's just in the Middle East, I think it's around the world, a re-entrenchment in conservative politics. People kind of like pulling back in, a much more pronounced nationalism, whereas before that you kind of saw like a much more global universalism. And he said that voice has always been quelled by the fundamentalists in the region. That's the fundamentalist gets all the attention. He said, but it's the moderate that's really been running the show, or at least used to be the predominant voice in Middle Eastern politics. And hopefully you're seeing a return to that with the Arab Spring.
That's an excellent point. I agree with you. I think we're reaching a turning point in conservatism versus the moderate voice in the Middle East, and it's playing out before us. The film focuses briefly on Morocco and its late king, Hassan II. What do they do to help facilitate peace during the negotiation process?
Morocco has a fascinating place in Middle Eastern history. There's only some kings that are heading up Middle Eastern countries now, and it's interesting that they tend to be tied together. We've actually worked on a few things, very close relationship between Saudi Arabia and Morocco. And Morocco has always had a lot of respect, even from Moroccan Jews. They've always very heavily protected Moroccan Jews. The story came out while we were filming this, that in World War II, the French Nazi regime came down to Morocco, and so we want a list of all the Moroccan Jews. And you have some of the most historic Jewish areas in the world in Morocco. Azura, Morocco is one of has some of the oldest synagogues in the world. And this is King Mohammed V, King Hassan's father, and he said, if you want a list of Jews and you want to put yellow stars on the Jews in Morocco, he said, first give me 18 or 20 jackets. We got the story from Andre Azoulay, who's a very close Jewish advisor to an Islamic king. He's in his class of one. And he said, if you're going to, give me first 18 or 20 yellow stars for me and my family, because that's the only way you're getting to Moroccan Jews. And because of that, there's always been a deep, deep intimate connection between Moroccan Jews, even when they migrated. Many of them did migrate to Israel. But there's always been a really heartfelt affection for their king, for their, albeit he's an Islamic king, but there's always been a close connection. So it's created a special space for Morocco to be an intermediary between the Arab world and the Jewish world and the rest of the world. And so a lot of negotiations went on here. Henry Kissinger spent a lot of time with King Hassan talking about how to fix things in the region. And King Hassan himself was someone personally who, the guy worked 18, 20-hour days around the clock, a smart, a strong leader, and someone who was just very, very plugged into what was going on in the world.
Is there any other regime in the Middle East that could possibly fill the spot of Morocco now? Do you think that's possible?
It's getting tougher, but you see, I'm one of the optimists. I feel like the Arab Spring goes in the positive direction, and it doesn't have to. So it's a hugely important time right now. For people to engage and communicate with the new regimes that are forming there. But no, it's really in a class by itself, and my hope is that other countries do start to fill that space. I mean, Egypt was a country that attempted to fill that space at the peril of Anwar Sadat, which I kind of think he knew, he could be assassinated for what he did during the Camp David peace accords, and of course history played out that he was. And so I hope that more countries fill that role.
Your film is being released at an extremely relevant time. Things in Egypt are as confusing as ever. The peace treaty between Egypt and Israel seems like it could collapse at any moment, really. What message should Egyptian and Israeli officials be pulling from your film?
Yeah, I think they both have to keep channels of communication open. It's so easy to fall back on, I don't want to talk to the other side because I don't agree with them. And the bottom line that our film brings out is that people have died and given up their total political career for these principles, for the hope of peace in the region, and to just turn the clock back on that is to destroy decades of good hard fought work in the region.
Great, Matthew. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, no, pleasure being here. Thank you.